Welcome back to the Kindness Code. I am very excited today because we have an incredible, inspirational guest who I think is going to give us some wonderful insights on what it was to be in care, but also more importantly, what happens when you're a care leaver and some of the things that she's doing to really help care leavers. Her name is Bethaney Dixon. She is running Adelphi and she is a wonderful, inspirational woman. Welcome, Bethaney.
Thank you so much for having me.
Brilliant to be here. And I think we're not going to dive in. It's not all about deep diving into your childhood, but can you just give me an idea, give us, our listeners, an understanding on where you've come from and what your life was like as a child and a young person?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of four. I grew up in the West Country, although I definitely don't sound like it these days. And unfortunately, due to as I've gotten older, lack of support in other places, had social services involved from before I was even born, and was in and out of care as a child and finally taken in as such just before my 10th birthday. With that, I was moved about 100 miles away from home, which is unfortunately becoming much more of a common thing. Split apart from my three siblings, I was going to say four, but split apart from my three siblings and then entered primarily foster care at that point. With that, I had a real mixture of experiences. I had the ones that did really well and were really caring, and then those that, we'll say the good, the bad, the ugly experiences that come along with that. But like so many people and young people that to this day are still coming out of the system, I reached 17 years old, and unfortunately, after going through an adverse experience that caused me to be in hospital, I found out from my social worker, was simply told, I hear you've got nowhere to live. And I laugh because, thinking back on it, there's so many things that could be done differently with that. But that was my push, shove into independence, where truthfully, I am still finding out things that I should have been entitled to at this, to this day. So, off on your own at 17 years old, expected to be at the same level as your friend, whilst also being in one of the most vulnerable demographics of people across the UK, and having to navigate it without necessarily knowing life, emotional well-being skills, and just expected to get on with it.
I'm quite new to the sector. I've been there 15 months. And first of all, thank you for sharing your story. We're not going to dive into that because it's actually about what happens after you've been a child in care. But what I cannot believe is that at 16, 17, we expect children who've had a really vulnerable and traumatic childhood to be adults. And as your experience, it sounds unbelievable, but your experience isn't unusual, is it?
No, not at all. I can only speak for myself in that typically everyone's story, setup, court orders will vary. But, between the youngest at 16, but then mostly up, myself 17 up to 18, people are then set up to move into this independence where ultimately most of the support that they may have received either through care homes, through foster placements, disappears. And ultimately there's then a reliance on local authorities and personal advisors and staff to educate and support on what actually is these people are entitled to. And it's so much more common than people would realize. And all of us at that point are then expected to work, get a job, essentially move on with things without even the typical safety nets that people would not necessarily think about, such as being able to message your mum, your friend, about how your day is going, or, oh, something really bad's happened, can I talk to you about it? Usually, well, not usually, but sometimes, and a lot of experiences and people that I speak to, if you try that, you're then at the bottom of a corporate inbox, unfortunately.
So a lot of children leave care either in residential care or in foster, and they're 16, they go to 16 to 18 sort of independent living. Was that your experience?
So I didn't experience that at all. So my story was quite different, to be honest with you. So I bounced around foster care, and I unfortunately, you can tell that I'm still holding on to these things myself to this day, because there's still quite a lot of shame or almost victim blaming put on young people and behaviours that all come from a place of not feeling seen and safe. But I was in foster care, as discussed previously, and I think it was 16, went to move in with a family member after running away, which is a very common thing across foster care, across residential homes from young people. I ran away and was then taken in by a family member. With that, unfortunately, that wasn't all it was set up to be. And my family member was at the beginning of their own addiction journey. So whilst being 100 miles away from my counsel, any quote unquote support that I would have received at that time, it then became less. And they only stepped back in when, as I say, I ended up, unfortunately, in hospital due to adverse experiences. And it then became what I could only imagine as a crisis situation where my local authority were, miles away. They've got a 17-year-old who's got nowhere to go. And it was a matter of placing me wherever they could, wherever there was room, not necessarily based on my own needs, my own experiences. So I was living out of a suitcase in what I can only call a not safe but not safe house, with blood splatters all up the walls, no kitchen, and then before being moved around more places again, and eventually ending up in a housing association flat, which, back then, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I speak about it like it was a long time ago. But back then, there was no carpet, no oven. And it's the reality that a lot of young people still face today. Not quite the detail of my own story, but, a variance in the level of support that they're actually given, and then just a cliff where they're expected to be an adult, as we say.
I say it almost seems is unimaginable and unbelievable that this happened. And I know your story is not atypical. It happens a lot, this kind of thing. So how did you go in this dire situation? A family member hadn't had the resource to look after you. You'd had this accident. You're in this, flat with no kitchen and no carpet and blood spatters. And sat before me this incredible young woman. How did you move from that? So at 17, then what happens? So you're in this flat. How do you then move on from that?
So I did what I could with what I knew at the time. And, multiple different things can be true at once. So I wasn't aware of the support that I should have received at that point. And
Let's stop you there. So why didn't you know? Who was meant to tell you, and why didn't you know?
I wouldn't like to point a finger at one person. And it's very easy for people who have come out of the care system to say, my PA, my social worker should have done this. But for me,
just seeing PA as your
personal advisor,
Yeah.
sorry. And even then, I'm not sure whether they're called that anymore. But
the person was
yes,
that was meant to be looking after you and giving you the right advice.
Yes, exactly, and working through pathway plans to independence and such. But I wouldn't like to just point at one person, because ultimately, when you look at anything that's done at a local authority or systemic level, yourself, Carmel, you've come from a corporate environment as well. You can understand that, is it down to that one person, or are they aware of it? Is there a workload that, hasn't been passed down effectively? You could, analogy, I think is an analogy or a metaphor as such that I use quite a lot, is that you could pull the string on a jumper and the whole thing would come undone. So it's very difficult to point the finger at just one person.
But the point being is, even if whoever weren't given the right resource, to give you the right resource. And where's that systemic failure within the system that we're allowing 17-year-old children who've had traumatic upbringings to just get on with it without the right advice? So you're in this situation, and it is what it is. So then what did you do? You went and got a job?
So at the time, I was trying to be in college still. One of the main things that they want you to do is be in education, get yourself in employment, off you go, because that apparently is one of the main stats that constitutes you as an adult these days. And without necessarily looking at the impact of everything underneath it. So I had dropped out of college because, for all I knew, was, oh, well, I need to be able to pay my bills. I only found out 3 months ago that I should never have had to do that. And luckily, I had managed to get myself a job. It was cold calling in a outbound call center where, you sat on a dialer with a headset. If, the people who will just ring you up and try and sell you something. And what I feel one of the main things that supported me, whilst the job itself was so difficult, and I earned my stripes with it very quickly.
Yeah, you did.
What that provided me was the consistency that I had never had before. So a lot of people will speak to young people and they'll say, you need to go into work, and you think about, it's to pay bills, to get money, etc. But actually there is so much more behind that. For me, I then had that consistency that I never had before. I had friends that quite literally in my situation, I would see more than my family. So I knew I'd be there from this day to this day. And all in that time, I'm building up relationships. I'm, working alongside people. I'm being invited out. And typically as part of that, I was no different, which is something that is so fundamental to me, but also so many young children coming out of the system who their whole lives have been made to feel different. So,
because we said before this that you never told anyone that you'd been a looked after child, did you?
That's correct. I only started telling people a year ago.
Wow. So that's probably brave to start telling people, but also, I guess, brave and exceedingly wise, I guess, not to tell people straight off and to not be the different person because you didn't make it part of your narrative. Can you remember what your specific reason or when you made that decision not to tell people that you'd been a looked after child?
I'll be completely honest with you. It was because I was embarrassed.
Wow.
And I feel that comes down, as I've gotten older, I've reflected on this quite a lot, that it comes down to, I feel shame. I went through a lot of bullying, whether through children at school or unfortunately in some cases foster care as children, for being different, for, the situations that I had been through. And I held a lot of shame about that. I found it embarrassing. And I also got to a point where I was like, what positive is that going to bring me? And I tried to focus on building my life from that moment forward, because what happened to me was part of my story. But up to 17, it's easy for me to say it now, right? But at 17, you still have so much of your life ahead of you. And what you can do is that you can let those things define you, or you can let them drive you forward. And I never wanted to tell people, because also due to stigma, whether correct or incorrect, or people, even if the intent was right, it would change the dynamic of any conversation that I had. And I wanted to show how much more I was than what had previously happened to me.
That is so powerful and so incredible that at such a young age, I guess maybe the driver was shame, but still all that understanding, just didn't want to be different. You didn't want to be judged. You didn't want to be the centre of attention and being the one to educate other people on how tough the care system is. You just wanted to be Bethaney and be part of it and just be, I guess, normal, didn't you? And not different.
Exactly.
That you could go in and do cold call sales is unbelievable, because that is a tough old job, no matter what. And to get out of bed every morning and do, like, I don't know, one of the toughest jobs. So, and actually, because I could talk to you for ages about all the three, but there's so many other good things to talk about. So you did the sales, it was really tough, and you managed to do it. Mm-hmm. And then you've had a really fantastic career. So just talk us through a little bit about you making this incredible decision to not be judged and not to be defined by your things that were completely beyond your control as a child. You did this tough job. What then? How did you move forward?
So what I feel is important to say here is, and something that I've learned recently as well, is work for me became my survival mode. It became the only control in a life where I didn't have control previously. And naturally, you have to be very careful with that you then don't start chasing the wrong things. But for me, whilst I was in work, I was achieving things, I was still falling into the stereotypes, shall we say, underneath that. But because I still got up and I still went to work every day, people never necessarily saw it. But with work, it then started giving that positive validation, those positive experiences, whether with colleagues who became friends. I still speak to people who I worked with at 18 all those years ago. Our lives are very different now. But some of those first jobs can set you up for the foundations of your life. And
I mean, funny, if you can sell, you can do anything.
well, there's so many different accessible skills from it. But yes, I'm not going to say that it was easy, because it definitely wasn't. There was, multiple times of getting upset in the toilets and just having to, move on, regulate myself and get on with it. But if you have gone through the most adverse experiences as a child, you can get through anything.
Yeah, I guess I've seen that in our homes. These kids are resilient. Like, they have had to get through things that most people won't even experience in their whole life. You do intrigue me, because you feel like a bit of a unicorn, because all the stats say kids in care have it tough. Like something like you said just now, 25% of prison inmates were care experienced children. Like, there's just so many stats to say it's really, really tough. So was there a person or people or an experience that helped change your path, or do you think it was just something innate that you were born with?
I'll be completely...
Sorry, that's quite a big question.
No, no, that's fine. I mean, my local authority had always called me the exception, and that wasn't a good thing. It was essentially because you're not in prison, because you're not pregnant, because, you're not, at least that they were aware of, doing drugs or anything at the time. Essentially, those stereotypes, you're fine. And I can honestly put it out to an innate drive to survive that I've always had in me. And don't get me wrong when I say that. I'm not saying that it has been easy. I have ended up in ridiculously abusive and violent relationships. I have ended up, getting in with the wrong crowds, the wrong people, self-medicating in ways that are not healthy. But there is, whether you're ready to face it or not, that sun will set and rise again. And that thing that you've been worrying about is going to be that day closer for you. So you can either sit in your situation, which is fine. You need to sit in your feelings. You need to be able to validate those and process those. But it's all about them moving forward, because when speaking about anything in life, you blink and 6 months have gone. And ultimately, you can then look back at everything that you've done or your current situation, and you can either be in the same place, or you can say, despite everything that's happened to me, this is the life that I'm building for myself now.
I want to bottle that and be able to dish it out to people, because I think, I'm a little bit older than you, Bethaney, but what I've come across is so many people can't do what you've done, and that you have managed to do that without a supportive family, without the networks that so many people who have survived things have done. You should be so... I'm sorry, I feel like I'm going to cry. You've just been amazing. And I just want to know, like, almost how you can... It's such an inspiration. So you did the sales, and you ended up with a really good corporate job, didn't you?
Yeah, thank you. So I am very lucky that I built myself up to a very corporate career. Naturally, when it comes to a lot of different jobs, the more you do that job, people will then be like, can you have someone sat next to you? Can you show them how to do whatever you're doing? And especially starting in sales, you build up so many accessible skills that work across a number of different jobs. So I had worked primarily in sales, customer service, those frontline roles that are key for the fundamentals of any career if you're going to go down that path. And I smile because I'd moved to London on an absolute whim. I'd always felt something in me that I wanted something more, and that wasn't that what I had wasn't good, or the situations that I were in really negative. But I had applied for a job on a whim one night at at about midnight and said, "Oh yeah, there's no harm in going along." And the same thing with the interview. "Oh yeah, there's no harm in going along." Next thing you know, it was, "Oh, when could you start?" And with that, as someone who is very anxious anyway, it probably it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. So I moved to London and I was working at an energy supplier at the time. I ended up going into training and quality assurance with that. So not only supporting people in, their first ever jobs, but then, processes, systems, soft skills, the what, the why, and the how they do everything that they do, to then working with team leaders, working with managers, building teams both in the UK and internationally. And this continued across both the energy sector and then over to finance. And yeah, I was very, very lucky that based on probably starting work so young, that I had built up experience that many others, probably to this day, much older than me, wouldn't necessarily have. And that's all without going to uni as well.
Absolutely unbelievable. And we said off air that at this point too, you still never told anyone that you were a care leaver, and you did it all. So you're just under 30, 29 now? Yeah.
That's correct.
Amazing. And have you built up the structures around you that our pseudo family and that real support thing? So going through all this, did you have supportive people around you, or were you still kind of in your survival mode and making it happen?
I will be honest with you. Up until probably, well, still now in some ways, I feel like my body will always be in that survival mode, because it's always, what's that next thing? What's that, that next goal? And I'm unfortunately, but very fortunately for what I do now, you can build up, supportive groups of friends, supportive people, which, if you have grown up in care as well, because you are not used to that consistency of people, is difficult enough as it is, let alone if you are adding in trauma, let alone if you're adding in neurodiversity as well. Because even with the fact that you may have built that up, life still happens. I had built things up, and on paper, in the paperwork, you'd look at my CV and you'd think, oh my gosh, this is great. Let's get her on a podcast and have a chat with her. But life still happens, whether you're a care leaver or not. I went through not just one, but 2 redundancy processes in 3 years. And what that meant is everything that I felt like I built up around me was then taken.
And was work still your support system? It was obviously it was your fix to keep you going, which...
Yes.
So then you got made redundant, and the friendships, and just like your childhood, all the stuff that you created and everything was taken away from you again.
Exactly. And it took me a very long time. This after the first time, truthfully, my mental health was in absolute tatters, because, as I say, my work was for so long my survival mode, but also that consistency and that thing that I knew I was good at and that I helped lots of people with. And then through no action of my own, it was then taken. And it's at that point, you're then like, okay, well, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to keep my house? How am I, you are straight back into that dysregulated survival mode that I was back in at 17. And it took me a really long time to not doubt myself and my value that came along with that. Because I feel, especially if you have been through traumatic experiences, especially those where a lot happened to you, not with you, that it's very easy to take things inwards. And if anything, in some ways, that can be a lot more dangerous, because you never, if someone expresses things outwardly, you can't, supportive friends, family, staff can begin to understand how to best support them. If you are a person very much like myself, where things are more internal, it can be much more difficult for those around you because they don't know how to support you.
And probably never truly understanding what it is to not have the person that you can turn to. 'Cause so many of us, if we haven't been in a care situation, we still got someone that we've to turn to, and you didn't. You are, I say, so remarkable, and you should be so infinitely proud of everything that you've done. But a year ago, you decided no to the corporate world, and you'll set up Adelphi because, first of all, what was a trigger to make you do that, and what's your big reason for doing it?
So I find that throughout, with a lot of care experienced people and young people that I still speak to this day, that there seems to always, whether no matter their past, there seems to be some kind of drawn to. Oh, I can't even think of the word. People then typically want to be able to help others in one way. You know, I speak to people who become nurses. I speak to people who then go back into the sector to become social workers and things. And for me, what I realized is that throughout even in my corporate career, I was still supporting people to be better. Whether, looks very different if you're behind a Zoom or things like that. But then I'd always been supporting, helping people, doing consultancy based off of my experiences that I built up separately. But the real trigger point, and I touched on it a bit a second ago, is that I went through the second redundancy process in 3 years. I had only just healed from the first one and started to really understand, and start to trust in the corporate environment again, because I stepped out of it for a while because I was terrified about going back into it for the same thing to happen again. Lo and behold, it happened again. And what is it that Einstein says? It's, insanity is doing the same thing multiple times and expecting different results. I had gotten myself to the point that I'm very lucky and grateful for the skills that I have. And it just happened again. And with going back into that survival mode again, not only did in that situation I lost my job, I also then lost my relationship within a very short amount of time. So I was straight back to that place of being homeless at 17. And this was just a year ago. And, I was noticing the gaps in support, not only just thinking back on everything else, but through work that I had done separately in positive behavioural support, I had then realized that I do have a really unique gift to be able to support not just people coming out of the care system, but especially young girls, women, and female presenting, because so often we see a lot of the negativity, a lot of the stats. And for me, it's so important that people can see what can happen. And so not only do I have that lived experience, but I have that multi-sector organizational experience where I can not just go and talk about change and the things that need to change, but work effectively with not just young people to meet them where they are and actively understand, not just say that I do, but then understand the cogs of the machine, shall we say, to be able to find that happy medium for real effective change that lasts. So I started building Adelphi from that.
So Adelphi is a platform that is there for care leavers to kind of get access to all the stuff that you didn't know only just over 10 or 11 years ago. So you've got the platform and just tell us a little bit more about that and how that helps.
Okay, so Adelphi started off as a platform. So it's a digital platform for young people across 10 different categories. From, as you say, all of those things that people just expect you to know, or typically that people would message their family. And so that's all things from living and housing, understanding bills, getting yourself set up effectively, to money, budgeting, how to do a food shop. I mean, maybe not for under £20 these days, but, how to effectively do a food shop, but then using my corporate experience as well of hiring people, not just finding a job and doing an interview equally as important, but also understanding that people also need to find jobs that fit their strengths. They might not know their skills and those aspects that are going to help them move past what they've previously been through. So all things work, corporate, food, bills, but then also the emotional and well-being side of it as well. So, spotting your healthy versus your unhealthy relationships. What could manipulation look like? Especially for young people coming out of care. And I say we because I still class myself within that, we are more vulnerable to those whose intentions are not quite correct, whether that is that sense of belonging, that being a part of something, that, I say feeling loved, I don't necessarily mean lovey-dovey, but naturally due to the things that we've been through, no matter how much you heal, it's very easy to see the good in things, whilst also the negative side of it with the bad as well. So it's not only looking at the life and work skills to move you forward, but also that emotional side of things as well, all written in a sibling tone. Adelphi itself, it means the words sibling or of the same womb. When it comes to caregivers or people who have come out of care, shall I say, it doesn't necessarily matter about the amazing work that teams have done in that. Due to the situation itself, there is often a lack of trust. There is, most people who come out of the system don't ever want to have anything to do with that. And that's something that I understand because I've not only been there myself, but I can turn around and say, whilst I'm qualified up to my eyes and other things, I am not an authority. I am just someone who has been there and has built a life completely separately from myself. And whether we're talking sibling, whether we're talking leadership, this is me wanting to bring you along with me because it doesn't have to be like that forever.
I love it. So you kind of want to be that big sister, that help that they didn't have. And so you've got the platform, we'll talk about this as some things change, but you've also done some other great stuff, especially around helping care leavers get their driving licence, haven't you? Which is such a, you need to be able to drive so much to be able to access so many other jobs and experiences. So tell us a little bit about what you've done around the driving lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I only learned to drive, during COVID, I think it was. And I will hold my hands up. The only reason realistically that I managed to do that with how expensive these things are these days is because of the position that I'd gotten myself into at work. And 1 in 6 jobs requires a car for the job itself. That's not even necessarily talking about getting to and from work. But, if we're thinking about jobs, we're thinking about education, but also well-being. I don't know about you, but if I'm having a bit of a stressful day, I will take myself off in the car for a drive. So there are so many.
And even if there's public transport, if I want to pop to the supermarket, I just get my car and go. I'm not catching a bus and lumping loads of heavy groceries home. And it's just that everyday kind of stuff that if you haven't got access to a car, if you live in the middle of London, you're probably fine. But actually, public transport has got its place, but it's so difficult. And then to get into work, our homes, you need to be able to drive to get to our homes. We look after children. And to get your licence and to buy a car is really expensive, isn't it?
That's correct. It almost feels out of reach, especially if you are at 17 years old, expected to be on your own. We've got to get you into work. We've got to tick off the good old pathway plans. But it's something, if you have, I'm not sure if it's still the same, but I used to be on, I think it was £57 a week to, prior to going into work and things, to be able to survive. If you have a choice between paying your bills and rent or learning to drive, realistically, you're not going to be learning to drive. And that is at the detriment of that independence that it brings along for you.
So you've accessed, for care leavers, reduced price driving lessons?
Yes. So a lot of the work that I do through LinkedIn, through TikTok, I'm constantly hearing about the barriers that still exist for care leavers that I had myself. And I'll be honest, I've spent so much of my life building relationships with people that for me, I pride myself in being able to provide solutions and not just talk about the things that need to change. So Drive to Thrive is a partnership that we've done with National Intensive and bookinstructor.co.uk to be able to offer discounted driving lessons to care leavers across the UK. And not only up to, naturally the care leaver definition, shall we say, typically goes up to 25. But as of last week, we've just confirmed it for over 25. So care experienced people across the UK who are not able to drive can now, access driving lesson discount to get them on the road, get that positivity and that independence, to move them forward, to quite literally drive them forward to wherever they want to be.
That's amazing. Are you super proud of what you've done?
I am.
Yeah,
I am.
okay.
It's, whenever I speak to young people, whether that is through, social media, whether that is through workshops, whether that is through mentoring, I see so much of myself in them still, which I don't know what that means in terms of actively how much change is happening, but being able to actively hear and see the impact that these things are going to have on these people, it really makes me smile.
And so it's not just a driving lessons, you've actually done something with Utila on the power and utilities for care leavers?
Yes. So, we touched on the platform, having the different aspects on there. With that, I'm very lucky that we just announced the partnership with Utilita Energy. So they are an energy supplier across the UK. They've got over 800,000 customers across their domestic and commercial side, and they really are a fantastic provider. So they do a lot around food and fuel poverty. So, they have a lot of prepayment meters through the customers that they support. So a lot of supported living and, housing association customers within that as well. And naturally, when it comes to those essential bills, education is so important, and that awareness, because I think back to myself at 17, looking at this meter on my wall, wondering why my electrics didn't work, and quite simply just panicking because so many people wouldn't know what to do in that situation. And I definitely didn't. And especially when you're dealing with trauma, especially when you're dealing with 5-6 million other things that people shouldn't have to deal with, typically that's when that stuff gets avoided, which then causes further detriment down the line with things like debts, with things, power getting cut off. And for me, similar to Drive to Thrive, it's about increasing that confidence, that awareness and that understanding to move beyond whatever situation has happened and all of those things that truthfully I wish that I knew. So I had built up my career separately and I worked in the energy industry for a little while, and any person that works in regulated environment knows about vulnerable customers, and care leavers fall under that. Really, typically it's done for mental health, it's done for people living on their own, there's people with with health issues. And for me, it's key to not only be able to work with companies to educate them on what it actually means for their internal processes, and any person that could be sat in the office who may be care experienced that, similar to me, didn't feel safe to tell anyone about it. But also to be able to, with Utilita, they have provided resources for the Adelphi digital platform to be able to educate and help people move forward.
I guess it's that understanding. Just sending red letters say you've got to pay your bill or whatever isn't going to work when you're overwhelmed. I've got kids in their 20s and they left home and I had to remind them how to do all the stuff you do when you move in. And actually for care leaver, you haven't got that person helping you, and the overwhelm would be terrible. So that is incredible. You've got the supporting them around the utilities and the driving, and now you've just launched a clothing range. Wow, I love this, and the stuff is gorgeous. It's really good.
Thank you. I mean, it's a bit of a baggy one today, but so what I found is, whilst I had the platform for young people, and I do a lot on TikTok with the guidance and things, a lot of my main conversations were around, they were to organisations, they were to care homes, they were to, local authorities. And I wanted to be able to provide something where not only if you are care experience yourself, but also any individual who wanted to be able to show community beyond circumstance could actively be involved in. So I've always had this creative side, as you can probably tell, and definitely the first podcast I've ever had them out. But I've always had this creative
So
side.
she's talking about tattoos, just
Yes,
to be clear.
yes, just to confirm.
If you're listening, Bethany has some beautiful tattoos up her arm,
you.
and terribly creative. Did you design them?
I did not. I just had some amazing friends who are fantastic at what they do, who work in the creative fields, who are able to do so for me.
And so now you're being creative with your own clothing line.
Yes. So, I am very mindful that there are, if I'm coming and doing something like this, I was going to order some clothes for myself anyway. But for me, it was a real full circle moment to not just be able to provide something that supported individuals and feeds back into the wider Adelphi ecosystem, but as a care leaver or as the many, many, many individuals that I spend time with, on the weekly, daily basis throughout the number of different things that I do, they want that way to be able to support and show community themselves. And with that, I say we because I don't like it to be about myself, but that's where Adelphi Apparel came from. And more specifically with that are more than a label collection. And I mean, that's not just a great pun when it comes to a clothing line, but for those who are in care, if you think about paperwork, when you think about the things that people have been through, you will be given labels and you will carry labels your whole life. And it's about owning that and being able to use that as empowerment to move forward.
I love the tagline more than a label because it just has so many levels and it is brilliant.
Well, this is the thing. It not only at that point, relates to those who have been in care, but no matter your circumstance, we all carry labels, whether that is from school, whether that is from health, whether that is from anything that happens to us, with us, for us. And it provides a way that not only can individuals support the wider mission and initiatives to be able to support better outcomes for care experience people, but importantly, it means that those care experience people, such as myself, such as the hundreds of people that I speak to, they're no different from anyone else, because that it doesn't label them. It doesn't make anyone stand out as, oh, that's someone who's different, because anyone can wear it.
I love it. So you walked into our podcast studio, lit the room up. You have an energy and you're a very inspirational person. So you're using everything that has brought you to today and to your life, and now you want to give back by sharing your messages and being that inspirational person in the room. So tell us what that is actually looking like, Bethaney.
So as well as being able to go and do talks, training, mentoring for young people, I am spending my time meeting so many fantastic organizations who either are doing incredible things at the moment or are being honest about areas that they can improve on, and being able to actively bridge that gap to help them, whether that's your teams and that awareness and understanding to better service, but also being able to be a positive role model for people coming out the care system, and especially when it comes to young women and female presenting young people, because that positive representation is so important in actually knowing what is possible despite everything that you've been through. And whether that is through the mentoring that I offer, through my website, through my LinkedIn, please just reach out to me. But
so just to be clear, because we've talked a lot about the care system, yes. And we know there's a massive mental health crisis. It's really big on children who've left care, but also in the wider world. So are you speaking to young people in general? Are you targeting people who are in care, children in care, or is like who do you want to talk to? Who's your dream audience? Is it big stages, small stages, in homes and classrooms?
Gosh, I still find it strange speaking about dreams, and this is something that you will find with a lot of people who have come out of the system because we're so used to being in the present. I want to make a difference to all care leavers across the UK and everyone supporting them, because not just does it take one organisation, the phrase is it takes a village and an understanding of the good, the bad, and the things that need to change, but also someone that is realistic and with the skills to help you move forward.
So I'm actually just going to quote you, and we kind of had the pre-pod convo. You said, remember the impact you have physically and emotionally. Just tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Absolutely. So everyone, if I asked you, remember that one person who was kind to you, whether that is a teacher, whether that is, a member of staff, we all have that memory. And, what might be just a comment towards the end of a shift for some people will follow others for the rest of their lives. If you are someone working with young people, you have the ability to be that person and change the trajectory through confidence and self-belief of that young person's life. And not just how you come across, but what you say, what you do, but how you come across and how you teach and believe in these people will have such an impact to how they then move forward. And you never know if you're going to be that person that someone thinks about 10, 20 years later that helped them.
And I guess I think what really landed there was believe in them. These kids need to be believed that they can, it's not just a label, and they can move on. I think that's just incredible. And hopefully people listening can just take that and think small acts might have a massive, like the butterfly wings in 10, 20, 30 years' time have a massive difference. So, Bethaney, where can people find you? I'm going to put it all in the show notes, but so you're on TikTok?
Yep, I'm on TikTok, although that's primarily for the younger audiences.
Yeah, but I think that's great. Like they can see, like you are just, the inspiration you are to say it's tough, but you can be okay. It's going to be okay, and just so inspirational. So you're on TikTok. We'll put the handle in the show notes.
Thank you very much. So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. If you're looking to know about me, my story, everything.
And where's the book you to talk and inspire and teach and lead and train?
Exactly. So we have a website, Adelphi. Gosh, I can't even say the word. Adelphi-app.co.uk. But for me, it's all about the people. Please just reach out to me through LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. No matter where you work, every system, every setting is different. I'd love to speak and hear from people.
Wow, this has been wonderful. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing. You're an absolute inspiration. I want you to go and be amazing and actually impact. I think you can impact millions of people, just all care leavers, but other people, because you've overcome so many challenges and you're so positive and you're not being defined by your childhood and what other people did to you. And you're just an absolute inspiration. It's been an utter pleasure speaking to you in person.
Thank you so much.
So I hope you've loved talking and listening to Bethaney Dixon talk about her incredible and inspirational story. There's going to be all the links in the show notes. Can I tell you, she's probably been amazing on YouTube and listening, but in person, she is a woman that lights up the room and she's a true inspiration. And I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, wish her all the best to go forth and just make change, because she's a wonderful woman. So thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much.